My name is Lynn Margulis. I've been doing science every day since I was about 16 years old. I teach at the University of Massachusetts. I have a PhD in genetics, but I really do much more geological things these days. 3 buildings come down at almost the speed of free fall, which is the gravitational speed. And for 2 of them, it's because airplanes hit them. And for the 3rd one, it's a mysterious reason. That is, there's no really coherent hypothesis, except it's claimed that there are these fires in them. Now, the most obvious hypothesis for anyone looking at the films, and that was a lot of people, is that the buildings came down because there was very carefully controlled demolition with high explosives that had been planted many weeks, if not months, before. The first thing they do is ignore, in all cases, the most obvious and reasonable hypothesis that is consistent with all other destructions in a very short time of buildings. And what is worse is that all of the evidence was removed. You can't do science without evidence. Unfortunately, there was a lot of evidence about the pieces that the columns were broken into, the nature of the uniform nature of the dust. But very quickly, if this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime, evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. Well, if evidence is removed, no scientist can possibly reconstruct what happened. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned, this is not science. So the claim is that it's something else. It's trying to prove preconceived ideas, not having data that they could use to make a model, but to prove a model that was unprecedented in the history of buildings collapsing. So we're not doing science here. We're not doing bad science. We're just not doing science at all, is my claim. So what, to me, is most impressive, since I do microscopic work all the time, are the many, many microscopic samples that show these extremely, totally unique red-gray crystals, red and gray in the same crystal, and it was found in all the dust samples. So the preconceived notion of NIST is that there's no evidence for explosives, and so there's no point in looking. That is the most unscientific thing that you can possibly think of, not to look because you don't expect to find evidence, and in fact the evidence is overwhelming that these red-gray crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries, and so they have a lot of evidence for something they have no explanation for. They don't even look at it. They ignore it completely, ignorant, and dismiss the explosive argument, and on the other hand, give an argument that's patently false, that no scientist will accept, that fires, office fires, can bring buildings down at the speed roughly of gravity, of free fall. They state these conclusions for which there's virtually no evidence, and then they ignore conclusions that can be drawn from the evidence. This is not a scientific procedure at all. Rule number 1 probably of crime investigation is to collect at the scene of the crime as much evidence as possible for what happened. And you had these steel columns in nice even pieces, and they were whisked away, and evidence was destroyed or removed systematically, extremely close to the time that the crime had occurred. This is not only unscientific, it's illegal. Many witnesses, firemen and lots of people, described the flowing molten metal, iron or steel, at extremely hot temperatures. And John Gross categorically denied their observations, so that because their observations don't fit his preconceived notion, he not only ignored evidence, he denied evidence. That is exactly the opposite of science, which considers all of the evidence that can possibly be relevant and built a hypothesis based on the plethora, the total of evidence. So clearly, if you have to lie or deny or ignore evidence, you are not doing science at all. What you're doing is lying, basically. So this is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence. It doesn't fit their preconceived notions. So NIST hires this UL, this Underwriter Laboratories, to and they do their work, and they show that the floors did not fail, they did not give way. And then NIST doesn't like that result because it doesn't fit into the computer model, so they ignore the real result, and they misrepresent and provide evidence from authority that the computer model is right. Well, people do this every day, and they call it science. And the people who do it call themselves scientists. I claim they're not doing science at all. They're doing propaganda or publicity or whatever they're doing, but it's not science. It's not playing by the rules of science.
1,600 degrees temperature, I guess that's probably more than anything could take, no matter what. Actually, it was amazing that the initial jolts didn't jar the building as much as people would have thought. But the tremendous amounts of fuel that was dumped on the building and 1,600 degrees temperature, I guess that's probably more than anything could take, no matter what.
I was just wondering what your thoughts are on a new 9/11 investigation. Did you sign this too?
Yeah, I've got it. Let's see. You bet.
All right, we can get another one for you. No, no good?
I'm sorry? What's your
I was just wondering what your thoughts are on a new 9/11
I don't have
investigation.
any position for you on that at this
No?
stage.
Will you at some point?
Thank you so much.
Haven't heard any compelling reason for a new investigation at this point.
How are you? Very well. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Nice
to meet you too. I have an important piece of information to deliver to you that I've delivered to the majority of the presidential candidates already. It's a group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. 180 of them, structural engineers, architects around the country, courageous and patriotic, who say there's overwhelming evidence that the three towers in New York were blown up in controlled demolitions on 9/11.
Don't agree.
Thank you. No one has ever accused me of being a shrinking violet or anything like that.
Don't agree. Appreciate your comment, but don't agree.
Have you looked into it?
Absolutely. Every architect I've spoken to, they did timing as to how long they thought it would take to collapse. That's why they put insulation. See those beams up there?
Yeah.
You know why they put insulation there?
Yeah, so that
Either for melting and not collapsing.
Right. There were bone fragments found.
If you put jet fuel in this building and burn it at that intensity, it's going to melt.
I think it's the same kind of conspiracy theorists that you're raising that say, oh, we brought down the World Trade Center ourselves. It turns everything on its head. That's a little silly, I think.
Looking like a Three Stooges movie covered in plastic, I swear to God. What are you gonna put there? That's good shit. Then we went back there. Whoa, whoa, whoa,
whoa! I know you said there'll be a time for politics, but you've also said you wanted to change the tone of Washington. Howard Dean recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11. Do you agree or disagree with the RNC that this kind of rhetoric borders on political hate speech?
Yeah. Look, there's time for politics. And, you know, it's time for politics. And it's an absurd insinuation. I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And it said it must have been a horrible accident. I was sitting there, and my chief of staff, well, first of all, when we walked in the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error. And I was amazed that anybody could make such a terrible mistake. And you know, something was wrong with the plane, or you know. I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error. I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error. And I was amazed anybody could make such a terrible mistake. And you know, something was wrong with the plane, or you know. I had been notified that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. At first, I thought it was a light aircraft, and my reaction was, man, either the weather was bad or something extraordinary happened to the pilot.
We have something that has happened here at the World Trade Center. My heavens, this has just happened within several minutes.
I thought it was an accident. I thought it was a pilot error. I thought that some foolish soul had gotten lost and made a terrible mistake.
I'd like to ask you about the August 6th PDB.
Sure.
I'd like to ask you about the August 6th PDB.
Sure.
You mentioned it at Fort Hood on Sunday. You pointed out that it did not warn of a hijacking of airplanes to crash into buildings, but that it warned of hijacking to obviously take hostages and to secure the release of extremists being held by the U.S. Did that trigger some specific actions on your part in the administration, since it dealt with potentially hundreds of lives and a blackmail attempt on the United States government?
Yeah. It was also an indication, as you mentioned, that that bin Laden might want to hijack an airplane, but as you said, not to fly into a building, but perhaps to release a person in jail. In other words, you serve it as a blackmail. And of course that concerns me. All those reports concern me.